Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to another virtual science camp. I hope everyone's week is off to a great start, and I hope you're ready to get a little bit energetic looking at our heart and lungs. So welcome, everyone. Just a couple of words of safety to remind you at the beginning of this one. If I ask you to jump or breathe or do any exercise, only do it to the amount that you're comfortable doing. So don't do anything you're not comfortable doing, like don't make yourself pass out or have any harm come to you by jumping too much if it's not something you normally do. So I just wanted to warn you guys about that. But I'm excited for this session where we'll be looking at our own bodies because the human body is a fascinating thing, and it's kind of neat to get to use ourselves as our material for our experiment. So to get started, the first thing we're going to look at is the resting heart rate. That's how fast our heart beats when we're not moving. So to start off with, does anyone have any suggestions or ideas how we can feel our heartbeat? Like what part of our body we can try and find it? Sure, Theo, where do you think we can find our heartbeat?
If we put it like just here, like of the position of the heart.
Excellent, yeah, so if we put it like right over our heart, either on top of our clothes if you're not wearing like really thick clothes, and it's fairly warm out this time of year, so like that probably works. If you were wearing like a big coat, you could go under a layer or like all the way onto the skin so you can feel the heart directly. Can anyone think of any other places we could also feel the heartbeat? Sure, Thomas, let's hear from you.
Maybe by the pool here?
Yeah, exactly. And in English, that's the wrist. And so one tip on how to like get it working well there, I should have thought of a less awkward way to hold this in front of the camera. But the best one is kind of next to the bone between the tendon. So you see the tendons, like if I flex it, you'd see tendons down the middle and you can feel a hard part there. And then there's the bones to the side, and it's right between those two where you can get the best one there. And sometimes you need to press a little bit hard so that you constrict the blood vessel and you can hear it beating there against the artery. So that's another great place. And that's a great place to find the heartbeat of someone else, because sometimes it's a little bit awkward putting your hand on their chest if you're finding the heartbeat of someone else. So everyone try finding your heartbeat both on your chest and on your wrist. And while people are trying that, does anyone have any suggestions, any other places we can look for our heartbeat? That looks like Jules and Clara.
You put your finger right here.
Oh, that's an excellent one, and that's called the jugular. That's the main artery going to the head. And as you guys know, your brain's a very important organ. It needs a lot of blood. And so we can feel the heartbeat, and kind of the trick to get that one, the windpipe goes down the middle. And we'll be looking at that when we look at breathing, and kind of just next to that, forcing your fingers up in there, and you can feel the heartbeat from the jugular. And that's another strong place for it. It's not one that works very well if you're talking at the same time, because when you're talking, the vibrations from your vocal cords kind of confuse what you're feeling. But as long as you're not talking, that's a great place to look for it as well. And there's a couple of other places you could look for your heartbeat, but usually it's a little bit weaker there. One that's worth mentioning in case you're looking at your partner's heartbeat, because a number of you are siblings together doing this, a bad place for you to check for someone else's is using your thumb rather than your two fingers, because your thumb actually has its own heartbeat itself. So if you try this, if you have a really strong heartbeat, maybe once we start doing a bit of exercise, try pushing your thumb against something hard, like against a table, like against my table there. And if you concentrate on it really hard, you might be able to find your heartbeat there. Other common places are your ankle, or even sometimes you can get like in your elbow here. It's not a great one, but you can kind of get one there. Pretty much anywhere in the body where there's a big artery that's flowing near enough to the surface that you can feel the surface. But I'm going to recommend from the three we've mentioned so far, either directly feeling your heart, feeling your jugular, or feeling your wrist. Whichever one's easiest for you to feel, then I want you to feel for your heartbeat there. And I'm going to get you to count the number of beats in a given amount of time. And then we'll get our resting heart rate. Now, resting heart rate should be done when you're calm and you're resting and there's nothing that's exciting you and bringing your heart rate up. And I hope you guys are really excited to see me. So maybe it's not going to be the calmest resting heart rate, but most people are sitting calmly. So we should be able to get a fairly good baseline. So everyone should be feeling for their pulse right now. If you can't find it, let me know and we can try and troubleshoot and like figure out a better way for you to count it, because I want everyone to be able to be like feeling their pulse and following along. Okay, and it looks like everyone's feeling it. I'm going to start a timer and I want you to count the number of times that your heart beats in 15 seconds while I have this timer going. So I'll say 3, 2, 1, then go. Count the number of beats, and then afterwards write in the chat the number of beats that you felt there. Okay, so everyone ready to count their heartbeats? 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, and stop. Now I want you to write the number of times your heart beat during those 15 seconds in the chat. And if there's more than one of you, feel free to write it twice or like 3 times so we have more different measures of that. Okay, and I'm seeing a lot of, well, a couple of answers come in. So we have 15, 19, 14, 12, another 15, and 13. And we're going to do that one more time, and I want you to see if it's the same as before or different. Because actually, when we did it the first time, I had a problem getting the timer started, and so I just kind of guessed at whatever seemed close enough to it. So it's not a very accurate measure at all. So we're going to try that one more time. So ready, counting again. So get ready to count. And 3, 2, 1, start. Okay, stop. Okay, and then write in your chat how many times it was that time. And it's looking pretty similar to last time. So most are around 15, some a little bit less, some a little bit higher. That's actually slightly slower than I was expecting because you guys are younger than me. But normally an average resting heart rate for an adult is about 60 to 80 beats per minute. Oh, for 15 seconds, if we want to convert that to per minute, 15 seconds times 4 is the 60 seconds in a minute. So we multiply yours by 4. If you add 15, that works out to 60 beats per minute. 13 times 4 is 52 beats per minute. 16 times 4 is 64 beats per minute. And usually for children, it's about 20% higher than it would be. Like if you're exactly the same when you're my age, your heart rate will be about 20% lower. So I was expecting for most of you to be in the 70 to 80 range. For myself, I counted 15. Excellent, the maximum that we can reach. So that leads to what we'll be doing in 5 minutes, trying to get our heartbeat going up a little bit higher. But I'd like a quick answer to that in case you're really eager for a number. Usually it's accepted that the maximum heart rate you should bring your heart rate up to is your 220 minus your age. For example, if you're 10 years old, 220 minus 10 is 210. Me, I'm 35, so 220 minus 35 is 185. And that's theoretically the maximum that my heart can beat. It's possible in certain conditions for you to be able to go beyond your maximum. It's usually not advised to do that. And often for exercise, it's advised that depending what you want to do, like the goal of your exercise, it's usually recommended that you'd exercise at 60 to 80% for your maximum heart rate. But we'll have another look at that in a minute. But Before we do that, because I want you guys to be nice and rested still for the next part where we look at our resting breathing rate. This one's a little bit trickier to do because your heart rate, you can kind of think about it and make your heart rate go a little bit quicker, a little bit slower, but you can't really change it that much that easily. Your breathing, you have complete control of. So heart rate is covered by what we call the autonomous nervous system. That means it's automatic, it's controlled. You can learn to think about it and change it a bit, but only a certain amount. Like it's gonna do what it wants to do. Your breathing, you can very easily decide to hold your breath or breathe quickly. So it's difficult to get a measure of how often you would normally breathe if you're not forcing yourself to do it. So you're gonna need to try and think of how you breathe comfortably without forcing it too quick or too slow, and then try and count how many breaths you'd have. So that's a little bit tricky to do, but we're gonna try and do that without like thinking about it, because the thinking can make it faster or slower, and try and count the number of times you breathe in and out. And we're gonna do it for 30 seconds now, just because we breathe less often than our heart beats, so it makes sense to have it over a longer period of time.
Do we do the number of times that we breathe out and that we breathe in, or only one of them?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So only one of the two. Like for each time you breathe in, you breathe out an equal number of times, but count the whole cycle of in and out as one. If it's partway through a cycle, like if I tell you to start and you're halfway between, count it as one, even though it's not a full cycle. But then every time, like in and out, so either decide when it's in or when it's out, whatever is easiest for you to count. Are there any other questions before we start that? Okay, and I'll be quiet for the 30 seconds. So like, don't worry that I'm not talking, I'm just gonna be counting my own breathing as well. So 3, 2, 1, start. Stop. Okay, and then like with the heartbeat, write the number of breaths you had into the chat. Okay, so far things are pretty consistent. Like I see 9, 9, 10. Myself was 12, which seemed a little high, but maybe it was because I was talking a lot beforehand, so I was catching my breath a little bit. 13. So we see the typical numbers there, somewhere around 10. And if we try and find out how many that is per minute, we just double the number. So most of you were breathing about 20 breaths per minute. Alex's seems pretty low, but either he's just really calm, so breathing like nice, slow, deep breaths, or maybe thinking about your breathing can influence a lot as well. So often people tend to breathe more slowly than when they're not thinking about it, because they're kind of concentrating on breathing well or breathing properly, or like breathing like you would at a doctor's office. But generally we'll find that a typical breath rate when resting is about 10 to 20, 25 breaths per minute, and a little bit younger if you're younger, like from about 12 years old onwards, that's about what it is for most people. But younger than that, it's a little bit more. So like if you're 10, then maybe expect 20 to 30 or like something along those range. But it looks like all of you have pretty normal resting heart rate and resting breathing rates. Now we're going to use some of the simple materials we have. So if you have a balloon, use a balloon for this part, but a number of you said you have a hard time finding a balloon. So use a plastic bag. And when I tried it out with a plastic bag, I think I almost preferred that. But because I told you guys to use a balloon and that's what I planned at first, I'm going to use a balloon, but plastic bags work pretty well as well. And what we're going to do, we're going to try and see about what amount of volume we normally breathe in and out. So if you want to try and see the most you can breathe in and out, that'd be like if your goal was to blow up the balloon. you take a big breath in and put as much in the balloon as possible. We'll do that in a minute, but at first what we want to do is just see how much our comfortable normal breathing in out would be. It's kind of difficult to do because you're pushing against a balloon and that's not normally how you breathe, but just try and breathe calmly like you were when you were counting your breath, and try and look at how much air goes in and out of the balloon, or the bag in your case. And I'm going to do it with the bag as well because it's like a little more comfortable. And of course, when we're blowing into a balloon or a bag, it's a spherical object, so it's getting bigger, and we don't have that good an idea of how much volume it takes up. But if we compare it to some things of known volume, like if we compare it to a water bottle, or if we compare it to a brick of milk, about how do those volumes compare? Do we think we're breathing more than a liter or less than a liter with each breath? And anyone, feel free to go on the microphone or the chat to say about how much you think this is. Like take a guess. Do you think it's half a liter, quarter of a liter, multiple liters? And I'm not hearing guesses yet, so I'm going to do another thing. I have the balloon inside of a bottle, and this was a 1 liter bottle of milk. And now I'm going to blow up the balloon the same way I was before. Okay, and it was a bit hard with the pressure, but we see that was less than half the bottle it was going in and out. We can see from that, we're not normally breathing out more than half a liter of air. So, okay, excellent. We have I guess, about a liter. And when we saw it in a bottle, and I told you guys to have a bottle that you could cut the bottom off or that you already cut the bottom off. So if you haven't yet done so, try and put your balloon or your bag in the bottle to do what I just did. And we can see if we're breathing normally, and it's very easy to force it and to try and blow it up as much as we can. And we'll get to that in a minute. But if we're breathing normally, it's only about half of a liter that's the typical amount we breathe in and out in a breath. And we call that volume the tidal volume of our breathing. So that's the amount that we normally breathe most of the time. Anytime we're thinking about our breathing, we tend to increase that a little bit more. And if we're doing physical activity, of course, we can increase a lot more. And that's a very useful thing to know. But the tidal volume, just kind of make a mental note, because I'll get back to it later. It'll become important for some calculations we'll do. But the tidal volume is about half a liter. And with that tidal volume and our breath rate, which is about 10 to 20 breaths per minute, then we multiply the two together, and typically we breathe about 10 to 20 liters of air every minute. That's the amount total that's gone into our lungs and come out of our lungs again. So it's a typical resting volume that we end up using. And then we can use that to figure out how much carbon dioxide we're using. But before we get to that, let's look at our maximum lung capacity. So for that, it's easier if you have a balloon. If you have a bag, as long as the bag can blow up like with a full breath, it works as well for that as well. And for this one, you want to breathe in as much as you can to fill your lungs as much as possible, like take the biggest breath and blow that all into the balloon to see how big the biggest breath you can take is. So do that, and if possible, like show it on the camera so we can all see each other taking like how big the balloon gets. And I'll do mine again with the bag. So mine is bigger than this bag and about this size of a balloon. Can everyone, if you have your balloon or bag, can you hold it up so we can see about how much you fit into it? Again, it all looks pretty similar. I'd say mine looks bigger than most of yours, but that kind of makes sense because I'm bigger than most of you as well. So for an adult male, which I am, then the vital capacity, so not the tidal, but the vital capacity, that's the amount that we could use, is about 5 liters of air. Depending how big you are and how old you are, it'll probably be something closer to 3 liters. Maybe even like 2.5 to 3 liters. But once you become an adult, if you're a male, it'll be about 5 liters. If you're a female, it'll be about 4.5 liters. And that's not the full capacity of the lungs. We can never make the lungs fully empty. And we can think about that with a different demo. If I take a little bit of water and I wet the surface of this bag, and I'm just going to adjust the camera a little bit so you can see the surface of the bag. I get it a little bit wet, and hopefully I'm not going to pour too much water so it doesn't get too wet. So I wet the bag, and I'm going to fold it together. And the wet parts, they'll kind of stick together a little bit. Like here, it's not sticking all that much. But our lungs aren't quite like a plastic bag either. But our lungs are really wet inside. And when two wet surfaces touch each other, because of adhesion and cohesion for the water's attraction for the surfaces, they stick together and it's hard to pull them apart. So if we were able to breathe absolutely all the air out of our lungs, then our lungs could stick together and it'd be hard to open them again. So we have a capacity that we can't measure called the reserve capacity. That isn't to say that doctors, especially if they have a human body of someone who's no longer alive and they take it apart to learn about it, they can measure the reserve capacity in cases like that. But we can't empty the rest of the air out of the lungs of a living person because then the lungs would be stuck together. And that's about another liter of air we have left in there. So we have a total of about 6 liters of air that can mix if we're taking big breaths or like trying really hard. But we usually only have about half a liter that goes in and out. Okay, with all of that sort of groundwork on resting heart rate, resting breathing rate, and tidal versus vital lung capacity, I think it's now time to get our heart rate up a little bit and see how much faster it beats and how much faster we breathe. So I want everyone to choose an activity of their choice that they can do at home. It can either be jumping up and down, like jumping jacks. It can be push-ups, sit-ups, running on the spot. If you have a jump rope and room to do that, whatever you think is a reasonable thing for you to do in your setting. And again, that's assuming that, like, as far as I know, you're all healthy and you're fine to do things like that. If anyone has any reason why they shouldn't be jumping around, then like, don't. And just sit this one out and you can be resting and everyone else will be moving. So hopefully everyone has an activity. It'll be exciting if as many people as possible can do this on camera so we can see you all jumping around. But if that's not possible, don't worry. You don't need to worry about having it fixed very well. And we're going to do whatever physical activity we want for a minute. And we're going to see the effect on our heart rate. So I want everyone to get ready. I'll do a countdown like before. I'm going to take off my long sleeve t-shirt so I don't get too hot with my activity. Okay, and on the count of 3, then you're going to start being as active as possible until I say stop after 1 minute. 3, 2, 1, start. Change le quoi? Je ne suis pas très actif. 10 more seconds. Okay, and that's a minute. So now as quickly as you can, start measuring your heart rate at the easiest place for you to do so. On the count of 3, I'm going to start another 15 seconds and we're going to get our heart rate after the activity. 3, 2, 1, go. Stop. Okay, write your the number of beats in the chat, and once you've written it in the chat, get ready to count your breathing for another 30 seconds. Okay, it looks like you've gotten your heart rates up nice and high. We're going to calculate beats per minute by multiplying by 4, but first we're going to try and get our breathing rate before we slow down too much. And just try and breathe as normally as possible. You'll probably be breathing deeper breaths than when we're at rest. That's perfectly fine. This isn't going to be a very accurate measure of anything, but just to get an idea, count how many breaths you take in 30 seconds, starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, stop. Okay, and then write the number of breaths you had in the chat. Okay, not surprisingly, we have a little bit more dispersion than the resting rates. So we have some that are fairly low, like 16, so not much higher than your resting ones. Some that were kind of high, like mine was up at 31. But again, other than actually doing the activity, I was talking to you in between, so I needed to catch up on some breath there. So that might not be the greatest measure of that for me. But if we're multiplying the breathing rate by 2, then we'll see that most people were up in the 30s, some in the 40s, or even like I was just barely into the 60s, 60 breaths per second, per minute, so more than 1 breath per second. And if we look back up to the heart rates, we were counting for 15 seconds. And looking at which ones, that was where I said 31, I think. I was 31 for both, but the first time, so like, Jules was 34, Deanne Rose 28, and so on. If we multiply those by 4, in my case, I was up to 124 beats per minute. Alex was at 20, that's up to 80 beats per minute. Jules was the highest, so that's 140 beats per minute, which is getting close to that 60 to 80% of the maximum that you should be getting if you're doing most kinds of exercise you want to do. So now that we have an idea of how fast our heart rate and our lungs can be going, then a big question is, why do we breathe faster? And why does our heart beat faster? So can we get a volunteer who wants to turn on their microphone to explain why our heart and lungs are going faster when we exercise?
Well, because we're tired.
Excellent. So we're tired, so that makes it need to go faster. And Jules wants to add something, or Jules and Clara?
Well, our organism needs more nutrients, so they go fast. The blood goes faster to bring more nutrients, and the lungs goes faster because we need more oxygen, so it goes faster.
Excellent. So we're using more energy. Clara looks excited. Did you want to add something to that?
No.
Okay. Okay. So that's an excellent explanation. So that we need both more nutrients and we need more oxygen. So our blood delivers both to our body. Our nutrients we've already absorbed earlier from food we ate, but oxygen we're getting as we use it from our lungs, and it's carried by our blood to the parts of our body that need it. So for example, you might have seen I was doing some sit-ups, and before that I was doing push-ups. So the muscles in my arms, they needed oxygen, and there's already some there. But as they work more, we need to get more oxygen to there and more nutrients that are stored in different parts of the body. Most of the nutrients are stored in the form of glycogen and of fat. Glycogen is a complex carbohydrate, so our body strings together different molecules of sugar to make a polymer out of glucose monomers. Glucose is the simplest sugar we have. There are other simple sugars, but usually for plants making sugars and animals consuming them, it all goes down to glucose, and they change other sugars into the form of glucose, which is kind of like the base sugar or the easiest one to use. And then when we've absorbed food, we can convert it into glycogen to store it for a period of about a day. So then it's in our body and we can use it whenever we need some more sugar to burn for our muscles to do things or for other bodily functions. If it's for a longer term storage, it'll be stored as fat. And the fat gets broken down in the liver, and the breakdown products get sent by the blood to the muscles. So if you're exercising, in our case, we only exercise for a minute. So our glycogen stores can easily cover a minute of physical activity. Usually it can cover about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, depending on how used we are to doing it. So how much glycogen our body will normally store, and a number of other factors. But if we keep exercising for a long period of time, we're eventually going to run out of that, and we'll need to convert to burning fat. And for that, we need to get the breakdown products of fat from the liver to the muscles, and we need a little bit more oxygen. The other thing that happens is that we make carbon dioxide, and we need to get rid of that. And it's actually a lot easier for our body to detect carbon dioxide than it is for oxygen. So when we need to breathe and we get a feeling in our body like, okay, I really need to breathe now. If you hold your breath, you'll see what I mean. And that feeling comes not from a lack of oxygen, even though the lack of oxygen would be what becomes dangerous for our body, but it comes from a buildup of carbon dioxide, because it's much easier for our body to detect that buildup of carbon dioxide. So now we're going to do two things to kind of model that, or to get an idea for how much carbon dioxide we're producing. So the first thing I want everyone to do, I want you to hold your breath for as long as you comfortably can. Now, I want to warn you when I tell you to do this, don't hold your breath for long enough that you'd lose consciousness and pass out. If you're not used to holding your breath, then err on the side of caution and don't do it for too long. If you're really good at it, feel free to hold it for a long time, but don't overdo it and don't hurt yourself in the name of science. Just do it long enough that you get the feeling that it's uncomfortable, because we want to look at what that feels like and where that feeling comes from. So I'll start a timer so we can see how long the longest of us hold our breath for. So I'll say 3, 2, 1, go. Then start holding your breath, and I guess give a sign when you stop holding your breath. Use the applause reaction, and that'll be a sign for us all to see that you've stopped holding your breath. Okay, so get ready to hold your breath in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I'm done now. I think, is Theo still going? Not getting a sign, but it looked like he just stopped there. So that was about 50 seconds, and I think that's the longest anyone did. Most people was about 30 seconds. I think Charlotte was the first. It was slightly before that. But like all of those are fairly typical ranges. People who train can easily bring it over a minute. And the world record is something extremely long. I should have looked it up before this session, but I think it's close to 10 minutes. But that's kind of an extreme case. Most people can't hold it for much more than a minute, even if they practice and they train for it. And the two reasons for that is because our body uses up the oxygen that's available, but also the carbon dioxide builds up. And you get that feeling of like you just really want to breathe, like you want to open your mouth. And that feeling comes from the buildup of carbon dioxide. If you start to feel lightheaded while holding your breath, that might come from the lack of oxygen. So there's kind of the two in play there. But that gives us kind of an idea of the amount of carbon dioxide that we're producing, or the rate at which we're using oxygen. Because in that one breath we took in, that was able to last for at least half a minute. Even though normally with our resting breathing rate, it's every couple of seconds we're breathing in and out. A second test of that, if you grab your balloon or your bag again, and again, this one, don't continue doing any longer than it feels comfortable to do. But I want you to grab the bag and start breathing into it and just recycle your air in and out for that. And I want us to get an idea of about how many times you can comfortably breathe the same air in and out. Because when you breathe out, it'll still have a fair bit of oxygen in it, but it'll have less and less as it goes. And that's why it's important to stop eventually. So if it gets uncomfortable, don't force it longer than you have to. And just start doing that whenever you're ready. I'm going to do it at the same time here. And that's probably long enough, both to get the idea of how it starts to feel on your body, but also to get an idea for the amount of air you can be breathing in or out. So in most cases, you are breathing close to your tidal capacity, about half a liter in and out at a time. And that can cycle in and out of your lungs about 10 to 20 times before you have any serious problems with serious lack of oxygen or buildup of carbon dioxide. Air is about 20% oxygen. And typically when we breathe air out, so we breathe in and we absorb the oxygen, we replace it with carbon dioxide and we breathe out, typically it's only got about 4 or 5% carbon dioxide. And it still has much more oxygen in it than carbon dioxide, unless we do something silly like breathe in and out of a bag a number of times. Then the concentration of oxygen can drop down to 10 or even 5% as the carbon dioxide concentration gets up somewhere near 10 or even up to 15%. Now, if we do a couple of quick calculations to put that all together, then remember earlier I said your typical tidal capacity is half a liter, and we typically breathe 10 to 20 breaths a minute. So we're breathing in and out about 10 liters of air in a minute. Of those 10 liters of air, oh, and 1 liter of air weighs about 1.2 kilograms. It's kind of a handy figure that air is about, sorry, grams. I might have said kilograms. That's way too much. 1 liter of air does not weigh a kilogram. It weighs just over a gram. And so in that 1 liter of air, we have about 50 milligrams of carbon dioxide. And then in 10 liters of air that we're breathing out in a minute, we're breathing out about half of a gram of carbon dioxide, which works out to about 30 grams of carbon dioxide every hour that our body is breathing out. Now, if we relate that to food, we break down food and combine it with oxygen by cellular respiration. Cellular respiration, we take glucose, which I mentioned earlier, we break all food down into glucose, and that's kind of the base unit of energy for all living things. And we combine that with oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide and water. for every gram of carbon dioxide, for every 3 grams of carbon dioxide, we've used 2 grams of food. So with our carbon dioxide in our breathing, we were up to about 30 grams per hour at rest. That means we consume about 20 grams of dry food, just of glucose equivalent at rest. If we put that up to 24 hours, that works out pretty close to 0.5 kilogram of dried food for a day if we're not doing anything, if we're just resting. And that's pretty close to our actual consumption. So now that gives us an idea how bringing nutrients into our body, that relates to the rate at which we're actually respiring, breathing, and bringing in oxygen to our body and breathing out carbon dioxide. Excellent question. How can something weighing less than 1.2 grams can float? So I'm guessing that means float on air, like a helium-filled balloon or like a hot air balloon. And yeah, anything that weighs less than that for that amount of volume can float on air. And it's only like reasonably light things that can weigh less than that. Other sort of interesting ways we can see that, I guess it's the case with a hot air balloon. But one of the most common things that can weigh less than air is other air. And other air, like if we heat up air, it expands and the density goes down. Not by a lot, but enough that it'll cause hot air to rise or cause hot air balloons to float and things like that. Does that answer the question well enough, Alex? Excellent. That was a good question. Thank you. Okay, and I'm realizing we're out of time, so I'm going to leave you with an idea for something to do on your own, but we're not going to take the time to do it together. And this was the main thing that the empty water bottle was for. And it's going to be for a model lung. Like I'll walk you through doing it. 24 minutes and 3 seconds, that's amazing. Okay, so Deanne Rose, in case you guys didn't see in the comments, Deanne Rose just let us know the record for holding, longest time holding your breath is 24 minutes and 3 seconds. Did you end up seeing, was it a guy in Nova Scotia, no, in New Brunswick, Canada? Because I remember when I was biking across Canada, I passed a plaque for where the guy who held the record at that time was born. And it was like kind of interesting. And I remembered it was a really long time, but not how long it was. So we'll see if she's able to fact check that before we finish. That'd be awesome. If not, don't worry about it. Okay, so the model lung, and like if you're fast at doing this, feel free to follow along, but I'm not going to do it at a rate that like I expect everyone to follow along. Feel free to do it at home later. So I'm going to take one balloon or bag. Yeah, I'll take a balloon because that's what I normally use. Or no, I like how the bag works. So I'm going to put that in the top of the bottle, but not all the way through. It'll be open. I can see if I breathe into it, it can fill with air, or breathe out, it can empty. But I'm not going to be the one breathing here. I'm going to use an elastic band to hold that bag tight on the top. And I'm going to take another bag and put that on the bottom and hold it tight. For this one, by the way, I didn't mention because I didn't want people to go out of their way, like having a hard time finding materials. But this one works better if the bottle's a little bit rigid, like from carbonated beverages, like from carbonated water or soft drinks, than like a more flimsy bottle. So now I have the bag in the bottom, and I can pull the bag downwards and upwards. And you can see that the upper bag is now filling and emptying with air. I guess clear bags on a camera like don't show up that well on a camera, but it looks like it's showing up okay on the image. And so that's modeling what happens inside of a lung. The top is like our lung, and the bottom is like our diaphragm and our chest muscles. And when our diaphragm pulls downwards and our chest muscles pull outwards, it decreases the pressure and causes the bag, like our lungs, to fill with air. And so the exchange is happening not because of air being like forced by our mouth or our throat, but it really is just pressure with the muscles changing the pressure and the capacity of the lungs inside. And then that sucks or pushes air in and out. And that's like a simple way to model that. One other thing that you could do on your own, I'd mentioned to bring a toilet paper roll or like have one of that ready and some paper. We didn't get to that one, but that's useful for modeling a simple stethoscope. So if you want to take time to do something afterwards, you can use that and try and listen, especially with a partner. Like if there's a lot of you who are with a sibling or multiple siblings, works a lot better with that. It can work well with a parent as well if they have patience. But the stethoscope was actually invented in Paris in the early 1800s. And the early models of it were little more than a tube of paper or cardboard that was rolled up. Eventually it was refined to be like a wooden tube. And it was about half a century later that now it had like other tubes that we can hook together. So that like it can be further apart. But originally it was just invented because before that time, it was common for doctors to put their ear right on a patient's chest to listen both to their heart and to lung problems. And it was to put a little bit of distance between the patient, both because it was a little bit awkward. Like you can imagine how it would feel if your doctor was putting their head on your chest to listen for things, but also for transmission of disease. It was very common to look for tuberculosis and to listen for the sound of fluid in lungs. And so to distance the patient and the doctor, but then they found that it actually managed to get the sound even better. So your challenge with that would be to try and start with that tube and see if any modifications you could make with simple things around the house to be able to hear the sound of someone's heart or lungs better. Oh, that's great. Deanne Rose got back to us. So the largest voluntarily held breath was 24 minutes, 3.4 seconds by Alex Segura Vendel in Spain on the 26th of February, 2016. Okay. And when I saw the plaque in New Brunswick, I was thinking of that was in 2017. But obviously, if they made a plaque, they might not go and change it immediately when the record's been broken. So it must have been the old record. The plaque I was seeing was commemorating. Okay. With all that being said, I've gone a fair bit over time, so I'm going to wrap things up there. This time I'll stay on afterwards. If anyone has any questions, people had some questions about materials for Wednesday's session. If you want to stay on for any questions like that, feel free to stay on after I say goodbye. If you don't have any questions, like don't feel any need to stick around or anything. But for those of you who don't have questions, I want to thank you again for joining me. I hope to see you again at the other sessions later on this week. And I want to remind you guys again to stay home, stay safe, and stay curious. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.